Oh, I am so excited for this one. Today, we're all about one of the most iconic groups, not just of the 70s, but of the entire rock era. These masters of pop reinvention went from cabaret obscurity to global domination, only to become scapegoats for a cultural revolution that came crashing down all around them. It's a story of evolution. It's a story of survival. It's a story of resilience. In it, we'll cover the song that led to the most recognizable helium-powered voice of the rock era, and it was a total accident. There's also the story of how the band gave away one of their biggest potential hits to a lesser-known band as a gift, Rookies. But over time, their original version, which was only released as a B-side, went on to dominate the airwaves and surpass that group anyway. You'll also hear how they cranked out 3 number-1 hits in like an hour and a half, like it was nothing. And how when they turned in their album to record executives, they were told they didn't hear any hits. Turns out the album would have 7 number-1 smashes, and their main singer would replace himself at number-1 a record 4 straight times. But just a year later, that man and his group would be musical pariahs. Radio wouldn't touch their music. They didn't get played. They didn't have another hit for over 10 years. It's coming up. Hey, music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. You know, if you remember this, I'm a pepper, he's a pepper, she's a pepper. If you drink Dr. Pepper, you're a pepper too. You're gonna dig this channel of deep musical nostalgia. Make sure to subscribe below right now. Click the notification bell so you know when our stuff comes out. You know, today we're celebrating one of the most iconic groups, like I said, not only of the 70s, but of the rock era, period. They were masters of pop reinvention. Talking about the most successful trio in music history, the Bee Gees. On this episode, we're telling the story of their evolution through their music, the songs that are their essence. 10 songs across 5 albums, and I'm going to split them into A-sides and B-sides for every record. I've really been looking forward to this one because a lot of people will pretend like they don't like the Bee Gees or like it's a sin to like the Bee Gees. They're incredible. One of the greatest groups ever. My dad was a huge rock fan. He loved Black Sabbath, he loved Led Zeppelin, he loved the Bee Gees, and so do I. He raised me on the Brothers Gibb, and man, just joyful, they just make a joyful noise. The Bee Gees, they originated from a show business family in Manchester, England. Twins Morris and Robin Gibb, along with their older brother Barry, performed as a child act in several of the city's cinemas early on. In 1958, the Gibb family emigrated to Australia, where the boys performed regularly in Brisbane, Queensland. Dubbed the Bee Gees, which is actually an abbreviation of Brothers Gibb. They signed to Festival Records and they released a series of singles. The Spicks and the Specks are the girls. While their single Spicks and Specks was topping Australian charts, the brothers were already on their way to London for an audition with Robert Stigwood, the director of NEMS Enterprises. This led to a contract with Polydor Records and the swift release of New York mining disaster 1941, which became a UK hit. Have you seen my wife, Mr. Jones? Their debut album featured classics like To Love Somebody and Holiday. Now, by October of '67, they'd scored their first #1 hit with Massachusetts. Oh, it's like to love somebody. Such a holiday. Oh, went down in Massachusetts. However, by the early 70s, after internal bickering and some missed opportunities, their career hit an all-time low, reducing them to cabaret performances. Now, determined to explore a more distinctive style, the brothers partnered with producer Arif Mardin. Mr. Natural, recorded in London, showcased an R&B influence that continued on 1975's Main Course. Main Course was actually the Bee Gees' 12th album, but it was essentially their breakthrough. Their manager, Robert Stigwood, had a vision to dive into the dance floor culture that was exploding in America, so he sent the band to record at Criteria Studios in Miami. Now, where the group's earlier records focused on romantic ballads, Main Course shifted toward punchy, dance-oriented material. A couple of ballads remained. There was Songbird and Country Lanes, but the dominant tone was different. Hit singles like Jive Talkin', Nights on Broadway, and Fanny Be Tender With My Love opened the group up to a vast new audience. Now, Barry Gibb's striking falsetto, which was unveiled on the record, became central to their new identity. We're going to talk about that. All right, so jumping into my first evolution pick for the main course A-side, I gotta go with Jive Talkin', a total classic.
Jive talking, so misunderstood.
Now, like I said, Robert Stigwood had a vision for the Bee Gees. He wanted to turn them into a dance outfit in a very big way, and Jive Talkin' was really what he had in mind all along. Believe it or not, the song was a product of the band's daily commute, though. Barry would say we were on our way back from Criteria Studios, and as the car takes us back to the house that we'd rented, it was going across this bridge, and the bridge went tickety, 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 tick, and it just gave us a thought. I started singing Jive Talkin'. It's got a great groove. We got to remember that groove, and so we tried to rush to get it down. Now, that same night around midnight, the guys sat down and wrote the lyrics. Now, the original title was actually Drive Talkin'. However, Arif Mardin suggested they change it to Jive Talkin' to tap into the hip vernacular that was going on. So Morris explained, and I'll give you his exact words. He said, when we did Jive Talkin', we were talking about rock and roll jive, the dance. Arif said to us, no, I've got to tell you, it's a hip expression meaning someone lying to you. We had Jive Talkin', you dance with your eyes, and we changed that to Jive Talkin', you're telling me lies.
With all your jive talking, I'm telling me lies.
Now, since the Bee Gees at this moment had been stereotyped as a ballads band, radio programmers would not take a dance track seriously or an upbeat track from them. So Stigwood, he came up with a brilliant plan. Check this out. He sent out unmarked cassettes to DJs with no indication of the artist. The plan worked like a charm. Jive Talkin' was such an undeniable smash that programmers, they instantly heard his potential, and by the time they figured out it was the Bee Gees, really didn't matter. It was already a hit. Jive Talkin' went straight to #1 of the Billboard Hot 100 and in Canada, and went top 5 in the UK, Ireland, and New Zealand. All right, as my B-side pick, I gotta go with Nights on Broadway.
On the nights on Broadway, singing in the...
Now, main chorus, it introduced a revolutionary new vocal sound for the Bee Gees. This marked the beginning of what some fans would later call the helium years. I'm talking about that perfect falsetto. Now, producer Arif Mardin explained how it all happened. He said, we try many things, like synthesizers, and probably because of my background with Aretha Franklin and all the R&B greats I'd worked with, I said, hey, Barry, why don't you sing a high note right here? And that was the first falsetto, which he sang on Nights on Broadway. It all just happened in the course of a day's work. It was a total accident. So Barry recalled the moment that Mardin pushed him to experiment. Arif said to him, can you scream? I said, under certain circumstances. He said, can you scream in tune? I said, well, I'll try. So he said, go out to the microphone and try to scream. Try some ad-libs with a scream on Nights on Broadway. And he did it, and this incredible falsetto voice came out of that scream. And they turned that into the falsetto that you hear now. He sort of discovered that that voice was hidden back there, and he never knew he had it. It was a total fluke. How about that? The public got behind it, though. Nights on Broadway went to #7 on the Billboard Hot 100, #4 on the Cashbox chart, and #16 on the AC chart. It also reached #2 in Canada. So there you go. It's also the song that Saturday Night Live used as the Barry Gibb Show. So he screams in tune, and it becomes the falsetto that took over radio. I love that. All right, so after the success of Main Chorus, which placed 164 spots higher on the Billboard 200 than their previous album, Mr. Natural, did, the Bee Gees' next album, Children of the World, arrived a little over a year later in September of '76. It would be their second R&B-oriented album. They were riding unprecedented momentum when they entered the studio at this point. But there was a problem. Producer Arif Mardin was unavailable after label politics had cut him from the project. They weren't too happy about this. So in response, the band decided to take on production all themselves, working alongside Albie Galutin and Carl Richardson to approximate Mardin's approach. The resulting sound strongly recalled Main Chorus, the previous album, and the group was really in energized form here. Side 1 balanced propulsive disco like You Should Be Dancing with the lush soul ballads like You Stepped Into My Life and Love So Right. The LP LP was also notable for its adventurous use of synthesizers in a mainstream pop context, particularly on the song Boogie Child and also the title track.
We are children of the world.
Now, after Barry Gibb's happy accident, his falsetto now commanded the spotlight, and Robin and Morris were somewhat sidelined there, but the brothers were already pushing back against being labeled as a disco act at this point, insisting they space out their disco releases so they weren't put into a box. Now, for the A side on Children of the World, I gotta go with You Should Be Dancing, a total classic. After Barry discovered he could do some incredible things with his vocals on Main Course, he continued developing that iconic falsetto, and it would be on full display on You Should Be Dancing. Anchored by Robin's mid-range counterpoint and Morris's uncanny harmonies, You Should Be Dancing set the stage for the infectious dance hits that would define the Bee Gees' legacy thereafter. The song became their third #1 hit on the Hot 100 in September of '76 and one of the biggest disco hits of the era. It was definitely a harbinger of things to come. The recording showcased brilliant musicianship that contributed mightily to the song's sonic power. It's just such a great song. Joe Lala and George Perry's percussion combined with Dennis Byron's drumming created that driving dance beat. Morris wrote the penetrating bass line that became the core of the song's dance club magic, and he sang the horn parts to the brass players, to keep pace with the relentless energy in the song. The horn section featured Peter Graves, Whit Seidner, Kenny Falk, Neil Bonsanti, and Bill Pierce. And Alan Kendall's guitar solo, man, that added a dynamic rock edge that really separated the track from other up-tempo hits of the disco era. And here's a little known fact for you. Buffalo Springfield alum and Crosby, Stills, and Nash man Stephen Stills actually played timbales on this song. Yeah, Stephen Stills, and he actually loved the song. The Bee Gees actually borrowed backing members from Stills' band while they were recording in a studio that was just down the hall. And after hearing the unmastered version of You Should Be Dancing, Stephen Stills declared that he knew it was going to be a monster hit. Can you imagine Stephen Stills listening to disco? Later, when Saturday Night Fever hit theaters in December of '77, You Should Be Dancing was featured in the film's most memorable dance sequence with John Travolta. Now, for the B-side, I gotta go with Love So Right. The Bee Gees have often described their songwriter as almost telepathic, and Love So Right is it's a prime example. So Barry talked about how the song's most powerful line emerged. He said, "No line ever looked so right to me as I thought you came forever, but you came to break my heart." But we didn't think of it. We sat there singing along, and there it was. Maybe we did think of it, but not on a conscious level. Robin actually added to it saying, "It just comes. Sometimes we surprise ourselves. It's as if somebody had said, put that line there. It's like we're picking it up from somewhere, as if somebody is trying to get a hold of us and tell us that's the line to use." Love So Right became the second single from Children of the World, released to coincide with the album's drop in late '76. The new single was an R&B ballad that you certainly couldn't dance to. Even at this point, the guys, like I said, they were wary of being typecast as disco artists, so they were very particular about how they would release songs. Morris even explained that they refused to put out 2 disco songs in a row. He said, "Disco music isn't that bad as long as it progresses with new sounds and lyrics. But the Bee Gees aren't a band that will do disco for the rest of their lives. We clicked with other kinds of music as well." Love So Right was a huge hit. It climbed to #3 in the Hot 100 in early '77, and it was proof that the Bee Gees could deliver romantic ballads just as powerfully as dance floor anthems. All right, this is the best part. In 1977, while the Bee Gees were in Paris developing songs for their next record, their manager, Robert Stigwood, asked him for some material for an as-yet untitled film about the disco boom. You know where I'm going with this. This, of course, became the cultural phenomenon Saturday Night Fever.
Over. John Travolta, Saturday Night Fever.
According to Robin, the brothers worked mainly from a rough script with little concrete information about the actual film. John Travolta later remembered that the Bee Gees' involvement didn't really happen until post-production. He remembered performing dance scenes to songs like Lowdown by Boz Scaggs and uptempo Stevie Wonder tracks. No Bee Gees tunes were in sight. The brothers offered a batch of already written songs rather than tailoring material to specific scenes. But get this, in the beginning, when the Bee Gees showed the album to the studio executives, they were all underwhelmed. They did not hear any hits. They said that. How wrong they were. In the end, the album had 11 top 40 hits and 7 number 1 smashes. It absolutely dominated the charts, even doing something the Beatles didn't do. Barry Gibb replaced himself at number 1, not once, not twice, but 3 times, with 4 straight number 1 hits. Staying Alive, Night Fever, If I Can't Have You, and Love Is Thicker Than Water.
Feel the city breaking and everybody shaking, and we're staying alive, staying alive.
The resulting soundtrack, of course, would sell over 16 million copies in the US alone and more than 40 million worldwide, ranking among the best-selling soundtracks in history. The soundtrack dominated the charts for months, and it transformed the Bee Gees into global superstars, phenomenons. For the Saturday Night Fever A-side, I gotta go with the obvious choice here, Staying Alive. But come on, how could I leave this one out? I mean, it's a cultural touchstone. Like I said, the brothers were already working on material for their album. Robert Stigwood, he asked him to create songs for the Saturday Night Fever movie. And originally, Stigwood wanted the Bee Gees to call the song Saturday Night so it would better match the movie. But the brothers, they wanted nothing to do with that title. I mean, Morris would say there were so many songs called Saturday Night already, even one by the Bay City Rollers. So when we rewrote it for the movie, we just called it Staying Alive. And Stigwood, he didn't like it. He objected. But the brothers told him, if you don't like it, we'll just use it for our next album. The problem was solved. Speaking to the song's disco label, Barry insisted, I didn't know that anyone was going to call it disco. It certainly wasn't in our minds, and we certainly wouldn't have called it disco. We thought it was just R&B. We liked the stylistics and the delphonics and people who sang in falsetto. So the biggest disco song of all time really isn't a disco song. Staying Alive was born out of an R&B mindset. And the lyric of, New York Times effect on man, that lyric. New York was having that effect on the whole world at that point. I mean, Studio 54 and the nightlife that was growing around at that time. That's what the Bee Gees wanted to capture in the song. Surprisingly, Staying Alive wasn't actually scheduled to be a single. But audiences saw the trailer for Saturday Night Fever and it featured the song. And they started calling radio stations and the main office of RSO Records asking for it. It actually tied up the phone lines for days. Of course, the rest is history. Staying Alive went to number 1 on the Hot 100 for 4 weeks in February of '78 and spent another 6 weeks at number 2, dominating the charts for almost 3 months. Oh man, there are so many choices, big time songs I could have gone with on Saturday Night Fever as my B-side here. Could have gone with How Deep Is Your Love. It's just one of my favorite Bee Gees songs ever. Night Fever, another great one.
To show how deep is your love, is your love.
But I wanted to give some love to More Than a Woman this time around because I've covered those songs before. More Than a Woman was originally written and recorded as a demo for the group Tavares. They were recording it for the soundtrack, and actually they had a top 40 hit with it. Tavares' version went to number 32 on the Hot 100. They were grateful for both the song and the friendship which developed with the Bee Gees. A spokesman for the group said, there are 2 primary areas of appreciation that we have for the Bee Gees. The first lies in their character as people. They're gentlemen of the first order. Second, they are the most creative and innovative musicians and writers and singers that we know. The Bee Gees' own version of More Than a Woman, that was featured both on the album and in the film, but it wasn't released as a single. Rather, it found its way onto the B-side of Night Fever. which was a #1 smash. But since both versions were included on the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack, this created a who did it better rivalry for listeners, and of course, who's going to compare it to Bee Gees?
More than a woman to me, baby. More than a woman to me.
Of course, Defiance actually released their version first. For a few months, it looked like the Bee Gees had accidentally given away one of their biggest hits, maybe the biggest of their career. But you know what? Eventually, the Bee Gees version became so big on radio, it actually eclipsed the very group that they tried to help. So in 1989, Barry would say that back in the Saturday Night Fever days, they as a band didn't think much about their image. They were just focused on making music that they truly loved and didn't realize that the disco label would stick like it did. It all just got blown out of proportion from there. Said Morris about the effect of Saturday Night Fever, he said, it became our albatross. For the film, we were called Blue-Eyed Soul. But after that, we were the kings of disco. And it's crazy. Even though they had done something truly unprecedented, something only the Beatles had done before, they knew in their hearts that the backlash was coming. But before it all hit the fan, the Bee Gees still had one more massive album in them, Spirits Having Flown. Released in February of 1979, this 10-track LP went to #1 on the Billboard 200, and it would go on to sell 20 million copies worldwide. The album went through a lot of working titles like Spirits and Reaching Out, and then they settled on the final title, Spirits Having Flown. Now, said Barry, and I quote, "It started in the studio. We sat down with a guitar and just strummed, and we found different chords on the guitar that we don't normally look for. That's really how it was written, and without words and without a title. And then we worked on the lyrics, and we worked on the additional, the overdub structures, things like that. It was really an experimentation of us trying to move away from Saturday Night Fever. We were trying to follow up such a mammoth album, but not really knowing how to do that exactly. Now, Spirits Having Flown showcased immaculate singing and the most elaborate production of the Bee Gees' career to this point. It delivered slow dance hits, like Too Much Heaven and Love You Inside Out.
Nobody gets too much heaven no more. Loves you inside and out.
There were romantic pieces like Reaching Out.
I'll be reaching out.
Also the soaring title track. And the dance rock standard Tragedy, which is actually my A-side. I love Tragedy. Now, Tragedy was written in about a half an hour. Their manager, Robert Stigwood, was downstairs at the studio when the Gibbs brothers went upstairs to do work. 30 minutes later, they came back down with the song just finished. According to Robin, Stigwood heard it and immediately said, okay, amazing, a #1 record. The recording sessions at Criteria Studios in Miami, though, were brutal. The Bee Gees essentially held the studio hostage for days, refusing to leave while they obsessed over getting the groove exactly right, living on nothing but coffee. They didn't sleep for 48 hours. But without digital sequencers, the musicians had to play with robotic precision to create what Barry would essentially call a perfect mathematical loop. That manic perfectionism, though, is what gives Tragedy its frantic, anxious energy. Now, one memorable moment in the song's creation is how the guys achieved that convincing thunderclap sound. It was all Barry. He cupped his hands over a microphone and made an exploding noise with his mouth. They make several of these together to create that expansive boom that you hear on the track. Famed fifth Beatle and legendary producer George Martin later praised the track's brilliance, saying, they used the word tragedy and the word becomes the chorus. Just that one word almost sums it all up. They kept coming back to that word time and time again. They spit it out and it kind of takes you back a bit. It's so effective. It's very true. Few times in pop music has just one word in a song been so powerful as the Bee Gees' use of the word tragedy. And not surprisingly, the song went straight to #1 in America. It was on March 24th, 1979. It became the Bee Gees' 8th chart topper, knocking Gloria Gaynor's I Will Survive off the top spot in the process. All right, for the B-side pick on this one, I got to go with Too Much Heaven. Just a sleek, perfect track. Heaven was one of 3 songs written in one very productive day for the band. In fact, it was one very productive hour and a half, really. It was during a break in the filming of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. That was in the movie. They were making some bad decisions here. They had an afternoon off and they wrote Tragedy and Too Much Heaven in about an hour. And then the title track of Andy Gibbs' second album, Shadow Dancing. 3 songs, 3 #1 hits in about an hour and a half. Too Much Heaven was actually the first single released from the album. Again, as a way to push back against that disco stereotype. Very risky to put out a ballad as your first song from an album, but it was written, like I said, as a deliberate act of defiance against their own Saturday Night Fever image. Barry insisted on a slow R&B ballad as the first single for the new album to prove that they were a diverse act. Now, RSO record executives reportedly begged the band to release a dance track like Tragedy first. They were hell-bent on capitalizing on that disco craze. But Barry, he refused to budge. This led to a high-stakes standoff with the label, and Barry won. The song's massive chart-topping success actually helped prolong the life of the Bee Gees era by winning over adult contemporary fans who would dismiss them as really disco fluff. All right, here's where things get truly insane. On July 12, 1979, a riot at the Chicago ballpark changed the history of popular music forever. Known as Disco Demolition Night, the event started as really a promotional gimmick for the Chicago White Sox. Promised 98-cent tickets to a doubleheader between the White Sox and Detroit Tigers in exchange for bringing a disco record which would be blown up in center field between games. There was also cheap beer, not a good mix there. So about 50,000 fans packed Comiskey Park on the south side of Chicago, while thousands more gathered outside after the stadium's 45,000 seat capacity was breached. After the first game, the demolition was set up in center field as the crowd chanted, "Disco sucks." This was accompanied by the ballpark's organ. Radio DJ Steve Dahl, he deemed it the world's largest anti-disco rally. Dressed in a military combat jacket and helmet, he shouted, "They're not going to shove it down our throats. We rock and rollers will resist and we will triumph." And then Steve triggered the explosives that destroyed a giant crate of vinyl records. This rowdy crowd rushed onto the field, smashing bottles, breaking more records, starting a bonfire, destroying a batting cage, and stealing the bases. After nearly an hour of chaos, riot police dispersed the crowds. The field was unplayable, forcing the White Sox to forfeit the second game. 39 rioters were arrested.
The melee lasted an hour and a half and resulted in 39 arrests and a few minor injuries.
The Bee Gees, Disco Demolition Night triggered a swift backlash that hit the Bee Gees particularly hard, since they'd become the most visible symbols of disco after Saturday Night Fever dominated pop culture for over a year. Rock-oriented radio stations in the U.S., they rapidly dropped disco from playlists everywhere. The Bee Gees' new releases struggled for airplay despite their continued songwriting strength, effectively stalling their chart momentum in the early 80s. And just like that, nobody would play their records. The biggest act in the world. I mean, we're talking about a band that, the only band that had ever done anything close to it were the Beatles. And the Bee Gees, overnight, nobody would play their records. They went from hero to zero like that. Now, commentators also note that resentment toward the commercialization of disco was often projected specifically onto the Gibb brothers, making them scapegoats for a broader anti-disco movement that was taking over the world. I mean, you're talking about a group that had 7 #1 hits in about 2.5 years. Barry Gibb wrote 11 #1 hits, and nobody's ever done that, to my knowledge, in history. 11 #1 hits in 2 years. Did that for his brother Andy, Yvonne Elliman, the Grease song, all that. If you look at all that, he wrote 11 #1 hits in 2 years, and then he was gone. Just like that, overnight. Not even the Beatles. Not even, I mean, that's the greatest 2 years for a songwriter ever. I mean, I cannot think of a band or a group or an artist that went from the highest of the high to the lowest of the low overnight. Overnight. So that wraps up the 70s and leads us into the early 80s, the era of the Bee Gees' backlash. Finding themselves more or less blacklisted from radio altogether, the brothers Gibb began putting more emphasis on writing for other musicians, Barbra Streisand, Dionne Warwick, Kenny Rogers, and Dolly Parton. But when it came time to their own material, they just continued to do what they'd always done, evolve. Their 16th studio album, Living Eyes, had the misfortune of following the blockbuster spirits having flown. So its quieter strengths have been easily overshadowed, but it's a great album to go back to. The album shows a focused adult pop vision with the reflective title track and the tender Paradise standing as sophisticated counterparts to their late 70s ballads. Seriously, this is the record you should go back to because you know all the other stuff.
Be here when the miracle comes. You promise me paradise.
But despite all the polish and lavish packaging, Living Eyes, it got completely buried. Of course, people were burnt out on the Bee Gees, like I said. Add to that the fact that pop music was shifting gears, and this album, it never stood a chance. But looking back now, Living Eyes is honestly, truly underrated gem. A late peak Bee Gees album that deserves another listen for sure. So here's my A-side, Paradise. It's one of the better tracks on the album. But you could say that the recording of Paradise was less of a creative pursuit and more of a high-stakes contractual hostage crisis. The Bee Gees were trapped in a $200 million legal war with Robert Stigwood and their label at this point. They were forced to deliver the album Living Eyes to fulfill a final contract with the label RSO. Compounding the stress was the fact that Barry fired the group's backing musicians, Blue Weaver, Dennis Byron, and Alan Kendall during the album's recording sessions. Barry decided he wanted perfection and replaced his longtime brothers in arms with high-priced session superstars like Steve Gadd and Jeff Porcaro.
You promise me paradise.
Amidst this corporate coldness, a haunting emotional drama unfolded at the microphone as well. While the title suggests bliss, the lyrics, nobody knows the pain I feel, that mirrored the brothers' crumbling private lives. Robin, he was spiraling through a messy divorce. Morris, he was battling sobriety. When Robin's vocals reached their peak in the bridge, the performance captures a raw, shaky turmoil that sounds like a literal cry for help. And Barry later admitted the period nearly drove them around the twist, making Paradise as a fascinating paradox. A song born of legal spite and family heartbreak, masquerading as a polished soft rock ballad. There's a lot to unpack here.
You promise me paradise.
For the B-side, I gotta go with the title track, Living Eyes. The second single was released in November of '81. And despite promoting it with appearances on The Donahue Show in the US and on Parkinson in Britain, Living Eyes was not destined to be a US hit. It only went to number 45 in the States, breaking their streak of mega hits. Living Eyes failed to chart in the UK altogether, although it did make it to number 14 on the Canadian Adult Contemporary chart. Barry described Living Eyes as an up-tempo philosophical ballad. Basically, the message in the song, if there is to be a message, is that if only everyone felt like this. The song was a deliberate attempt to distance the group from the disco label, placing more emphasis on the brothers' natural earthy vocal registers. Musically, it's more akin to early 80s soft rock, opening with an atmospheric A minor synth line and unfolding into a graceful arrangement featuring legendary session drummer Jeff Porcaro and pianist Richard T. Of course, the song also holds a unique place in technology history. It's the first track ever publicly demonstrated on a compact disc during the BBC's Tomorrow's World program in 1981, so there's that history.
Of the album. All the same songs, but a fraction of the size.
Ultimately, though, the story of the Bee Gees is one of reinvention. They didn't just survive the transition from 60s pop to 70s R&B and disco. They mastered it, creating a sonic blueprint defined by Barry's soaring falsetto and impeccable three-part harmonies. This is the gold standard for pop craftsmanship altogether. However, the very success that made them icons also made them the most wanted targets of the 80s disco backlash. Yet, as the dust of the disco sucks era settled, it is clear their music has endured. The Bee Gees, they were always more than a disco act. They were one of the most successful and influential songwriting teams in history. Easy. A group that turned personal tragedy and professional exile into a catalog of music that will never die. They made a huge comeback as well with You Win Again and Won. It went almost a decade without having a hit after the backlash, and they came back to dominate the charts again in a new decade.
No other could see me through. You win again.
Their output, their songs, they're just class altogether. And Barry Gibb, one of the greats. Let's have a great discussion below. What are your memories? Let's have a great discussion. If you like our content, we invite you to subscribe. Until next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends.